Hello, and welcome to the Jackson Center virtually today. I am Kristen McMahon, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the Robert H. Jackson Center in Jamestown, New York. We are pleased to have so many of you with us today. In addition to today's CLE, the Jackson Center offers a variety of free programs on issues of justice and law. And just so you know, we're looking at doing a series of diversity-related CLEs with Judge Foot-Beavers in 2021. So stay tuned for more information on that. You could tune in virtually to our programs every other Thursday at 3 p.m. Tea Time with the Jackson Center. We're nearing the end of our 2020 theme, The Other Through Your Eyes, where we've been looking at a variety of justice and legal issues through the eyes of those impacted by the law, with the hopes of fostering greater understanding. And on November 12th, our next one, we will be speaking with Rebecca Coakley from the Disability Justice Initiative at the Center for American Progress. And tomorrow, actually, our true next one, we will be speaking with Ruth Marcus from the Washington Post about the recent confirmation process and what might be next for the Supreme Court. So if you are free at 3 o'clock, please tune in. And if you're not free, we also host those on our YouTube channel and our Facebook video series. In 2021, our programming theme will be The Work Left to Do. We'll be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Jackson Center, as well as the 80th anniversary of Justice Jackson's appointment to the Supreme Court. Plus, we're finishing up the 75th anniversary cycle of Nuremberg. So next year is a very big year for us. And if you'd like to support our programs, please go to roberthjackson.org/donate to contribute. It is certainly through your generosity that we are able to offer our free programs to our local, national, and international, and now virtual audiences. And we'll put that link in the chat. We are excited today to partner with the University at Buffalo School of Law Alumni Association on today's CLE on implicit bias. The UB School of Law is hosting a social justice Zoom webinar on November 5th at 6 p.m. on the racial and economic underpinnings and impact of mass incarceration. To register and receive your Zoom link, please visit the law school website at www.law.buffalo.edu/alumni event, and we'll put that link in the chat as well. Before I introduce Judge Foot-Beavers officially, a couple of process items. One, feel free to enter your questions in the Q&A section at any time. You don't need to wait until the designated section at the end. So if you think of things as we go along, please feel free to ask them. And you will need to fill out an evaluation form in order to receive CLE credit for today's webinar. We'll put that link in the chat. And if you're not able to grab that link before the end of today's webinar, we'll also host it on the Jackson Center's website where you registered for the CLE, so you can always find it there. And finally, for that evaluation, you will also need the attendance code, and we'll announce that later during the CLE. All right, thank you for sitting through all of that. Now to officially introduce Judge Lenora Foote-Beavers. She began her term in Buffalo City Court on January 1, 2020. She is currently assigned to the domestic violence part. She previously served as the executive assistant / chief of staff to the presiding judge of the New York State Appellate Division, 4th Department, Gerald J. Whalen. Judge Foot-Beavers was the first African-American and first Buffalonian to hold that position. She is also an adjunct professor in the paralegal department at SUNY Erie Community College, where she teaches family law and constitutional law. She has previously served on the Canisius College Board of Trustees, the SUNY Buffalo School of Law Alumni Association, including a term as president, the Minority Bar Association of Western New York, where she also served a term as president, the Erie County Bar Foundation, the Erie County Bar Association Volunteer Lawyers Project, the Erie County Bar Association Assigned Counsel Program, and Teach for America Buffalo. She received her Juris Doctorate degree from the University at Buffalo School of Law and her bachelor's degree from Canisius College. Judge Foot-Beavers, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristen. And I also want to thank my alma mater, the University of Buffalo Law School, for co-sponsoring this program. I appreciate the support. So today we're going to talk about the topic of implicit bias. And so you all know that this program, I can't see any of you, which is really killing me right now, because those of you who know me know I like to interact and have wonderful discussions and engage in back and forth with you all. So this is going to be really different for me to present this material kind of by myself. But I'm hoping that you all will still be able to engage, ask your questions in the Q&A box, and try to take as much out of this as possible, even though we are not able to enjoy this together in person. So I'm going to share my screen, and the first thing that we're going to do is watch a video. The video is called The Look. And I just want to start this way because I want everyone to kind of get into the mode of thinking about what exactly we're trying to talk about today. So let me share this.
All rise.
So I just want you to maybe sit and think about, would you ever have thought by the looks that this man received that he was a
Hi,
judge?
I'm Dr. Amy Killen. I have my own medical practice, and I've been using Doodly now for a few weeks to create these really fun videos to share with patients, prospective patients on social media.
Hi, I'm Brad Callen, and in this video, I'm going to show you how anyone can quickly and easily create doodle videos, just like the one you're watching right now, using Doodly, our drag and drop doodle software. I was 20 years old. I was at my lowest point.
Sorry about that. So I just want you to think about, how you will think about people just based on what they look like. Did you ever think that the individual that was in the video was a judge? And yes, this is a little personal for me because I have experienced this where people have no idea that I'm a judge based on perhaps I'm wearing a sweatsuit or some jeans. But why is it that we go there? Why is it that we think about people and make judgments about them based on how they look? So let's get started with the PowerPoint presentation. So we talked about the look, and I encourage you to think about how this affects and impacts you on a day-to-day basis, how you look at people and what you think about them. And what I want you to think about is, do you make good assumptions about people based on the way they look, and why, if that happens, and if you don't make good assumptions about people based on the way they look? So understanding diversity in the legal profession and understanding implicit bias is very important for us as legal professionals. Why is this important for proper representation of clients? It's important because we must have a greater public trust. We are the leaders and protectors of the law. And clients and the community demand that we understand this concept of implicit bias. It creates credibility in our profession, and people and organizations value it. We know that corporations who hire firms, they are definitely making sure that they have diverse teams working on their cases. And it creates a better outcome for them in their cases. I think it's a really good article in handout 9. Prior President Hank Greenberg of the New York State Bar Association, during his message in 2019, talks about how important it is for lawyers to understand this issue of bias and why diversity is important. In part of his article, he talks about the power of lawyers to achieve social justice. And I think that's where we get into how the public has greater trust in us. We are the lawyers and we are legal professionals. We should be leading the charge on all of this. It also creates a better understanding of our colleagues and an improved office dynamics. You know, it's really important that we are able to interact with colleagues, and we spend more time at the office oftentimes than we do at home. And so people from diverse backgrounds and people from different life experiences help us become better people, but it also helps us with our actual caseload. It helps us understand cases better. It helps us come out with better resolutions. And so improved office dynamics in general is another reason why we really need to understand this concept. Increased innovation and performance and better outcomes have been proven statistically. Mistakes and insensitive decisions are drastically reduced with respect to diversity and inclusion training such as this for employees and understanding where implicit bias comes from. So our next slide deals with what happens when you don't have diverse voices at the table. Many of you may have remembered last year, H&M had a model, a young Black boy modeling a hoodie that said, "Coolest monkey in the jungle." Well, if you don't really understand or have cultural competence with respect to African Americans in this country and the historical reference to Black people as monkeys, then you would not understand why this is such an offensive ad. H&M quickly removed this ad and apologized for their actions, but the damage was done. And clearly you can see that when you don't have proper people at the table, when you don't have diverse voices at the table, when you only have one perspective at the table, these are the things that can happen. Gucci was another business that found themselves in the middle of trouble when they had this blackface turtleneck last year. And so they didn't understand how offensive the whole blackface concept is to African Americans and Black people. And so a part of their apology, they said that we are fully committed to increasing diversity throughout our organization and turning this incident into a powerful learning moment for the Gucci team and beyond. So I think what happens is that we all have made mistakes. Many of our businesses have not maybe made the best decisions with respect to diversity and inclusion, but I just want to show these as examples of how people and businesses can repair from this. It's difficult for this to happen because we often have old school mentality and habits, and I'll be the first one to admit that, you know, I'm over 50. I won't tell you how much over 50, but, you know, my boys tell me all the time that I am totally old school. And when I see them doing things in a different way, I'm often very critical of that. And so it's very difficult for me to think about things in a different way, in the 2020 way, such as a millennial would think, because I was raised a certain way. My parents wanted me to do things a certain way, and they instilled in me certain values and morals that sometimes I say doing things in a different way is not correct. Well, we all kind of have to think things through and understand that our way isn't always necessarily the best way. There's alternative ways to handle things, and it's not to say that it's not good. It's just what we need to do. Sometimes we have to rethink our mentality and our habits. This also is difficult because it must be leadership driven. And it's great to have employees who are excited about trying to implement diverse programming or to try to think about hiring. But this really has to be leadership driven. It has to start at the top. There has to be a plan. And it really doesn't happen quickly. It's something that needs to be part of the DNA of that particular office. There's lots of trial and error that can occur, and that's okay. You're going to have to try a lot of different things to see what exactly works best for your office. And we'll go through lots of different examples today, and I'm going to apologize in advance. It's going to feel a little rushed, but I really wanted to try to get you as much information as I could, and then you have plenty of handouts that you can go back to and try to do additional research. Politics and the media and family social influences are also extremely strong. And these are the reasons why it's very difficult for us to change the way we think and the opinions that we have about people. So the goals for this session is to make ourselves more aware of the subconscious decision-making that we make and the potential consequences that come from those decisions. And learning how to identify some of our hidden lenses so that we can see things more neutrally. It's really important that we start to identify when we are making these snap kind of judgment decisions. And we'll talk about what part of our brain is doing that. But it's really important that we start to understand when we are kind of making these quick decisions using our hidden lenses. And we have to learn how to look at things more neutrally. And then finally, if nothing else, I want you to just understand that you have to educate yourself to gain more cultural competence. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. You have to research, you have to read, you have to watch movies, you have to engage in conversations with people from diverse backgrounds so that you will be able to understand different types of people and the unique qualities that they bring to the table. We're not talking about overt discrimination. We're not talking about explicit bias. We're not talking about hate, bigotry. You know, those things, unfortunately, have been going on in the United States since the beginning of our time in our country. And unfortunately, it's not just African Americans that were Africans brought here as slaves, but it's happened to everyone at one point or another as they were immigrating to the United States. And, you know, we've seen some of these types of ads, no Irish need to apply, you know, help wanted, but no Irish. And that was written around 1910. I actually found one of the circulars that was for a job posting from the Buffalo Evening News. And at that time, the population of Buffalo was 200,000, a little over. And this was posted on Friday, July 13th, 1883. And what was wanted? A boy, 18 years old, to engage in grocery, must have experience in bookkeeping, good references required, one willing to work, but no Catholics. And so we see this overt discrimination again. And then finally, another example, we can use about 75 men, Italians need not apply. So my point is that we've had this discrimination in our country for years, since the beginning. And we'll talk about that maybe sometime next year about some of the anti-racism training that is going on in our country now to try to rectify some of this. But for today, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about implicit bias, which is going to be unconscious decision-making that oftentimes have a discriminatory impact. Here's another posting that I found by Cynet, which is a tech company. And if you can believe it, in the job description, they actually included preferably Caucasian as part of the description. And as you can see on Twitter, there was someone who said, hey, Cynet Jobs, what's with this? Your job listing for a mid-senior level business development position, top qualification is preferably Caucasian. How could you possibly think that's okay? And so I will say this, there are many people who think that that's okay. and that there's nothing wrong with that. And so education and being around people who could say that's probably not going to go over very well with people of color is important. And the only way that that's going to happen is if we have diversity in hiring, and that we are around diverse people, and that we educate ourselves about diverse people in our country. Sometimes you'll hear people say, well, why not just be colorblind? And I borrowed this slide from the American Bar Association, and Eduardo Bonilla Silva, his definition of colorblindness is a way of thinking that attempts to be non-racial. And that means that a white person would actively attempt to treat everyone equally without regard to racial identities. And quite frankly, me as an African-American woman, I want you to see me as who I am. I don't want you to see me as if there was nothing there, that colorblind, that it's just a neutral person in front of you. I think it's important to acknowledge people's differences and not be colorblind. That's kind of running away from the problem. But when you say, hey, I see you and I appreciate your unique values and I appreciate you as a person and I understand your diversity, that's appreciating me. And that's something that I want people to do. Just saying I'm not going to see color is not going to solve the problem. And it's actually very offensive to people of color. So if you give me a second, I'm going to switch my screen again and we're going to watch another video.
Let's start with a brain exercise. I'm going to ask you to visualize 3 scenarios. The visualization part is very important, so please close your eyes, take a deep breath, and imagine you're late to catch a flight. You rush through the airport, you make it through security, you run to the gate, you make it down the jetway, you step on the plane just as they close the door behind you, and the pilot steps out of the cockpit to say hi. You get to your destination, you go to a local restaurant, and you have the best meal of your life. I mean, really enjoy this. There's no calories in visualization. And at the table next to you is a couple happily celebrating their anniversary. The next morning, you go to the biggest technology conference in the world, and the CEO of this year's hottest tech startup just took the stage to speak. Now you should have a solid picture of all of that. So open your eyes, because I have some questions for you. In your mental image, was the pilot black? Was the married couple 2 men? Did the tech CEO on stage look like me? It's okay if one or all of your answers is no. Your brain creates images of what's familiar. It's less of a fan of what's not familiar. The things I mentioned are generally less familiar. The black pilot, the same-sex married couple, the female tech CEO. No matter how much you might love the idea of those things, when immediately confronted with them, the amygdala, that's the most ancient part of your brain, signals the hypothalamus to fire up the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is where the brain and the endocrine system intersect. So at this point, your adrenal glands release cortisol into your bloodstream, which triggers your stress response. This is the physiology of stress, according to the Dartmouth Undergraduate Journal of Science, and it happens in a matter of milliseconds, long before you have the chance to consciously think, I'm so happy these 2 men have the freedom to marry who they love. As Dr. Susan Fiske explains, when it comes to unfamiliar social situations, there's ample evidence that encountering something fundamentally different from what we expect elicits a stronger activation in the amygdala than encountering something or someone we perceive as the norm. This is what kept our species alive for millions of years. This instantaneous instinctive response triggers fight or flight, which is what kept us from being eaten by saber-toothed tigers or killed by a member of a foreign tribe. But in modern society, our brains still do this. When we encounter the unexpected, our heart races slightly, our blood pressure goes up, we sweat a little, and for no discernible reason, we just feel stressed out. There's a Chinese blessing that doubles as a curse. May you live in interesting times. I am the CEO of a tech company right now, which makes these some very interesting times. I recently had a call with a potential investor in which everything clicked. He got the concept. He loved what we were building. He had key insight about our tech. And so we agreed on a day to speak again. And he said, great, why don't you ping me then? And I said, you got it. And then he said, oh, wait, is that one of those phrases I'm not supposed to use with you? Because he's a man and I'm a woman. And in the tech world right now, careers are being destroyed and entire venture funds collapsing because some men have behaved incredibly inappropriately towards women. He was afraid of using the phrase, ping me. Now that might seem ridiculous, but we now live in a world where words and phrases rapidly take on new meaning. If you need proof, just look at the Facebook post of any guy who got a text from his mom that says, hi, honey, if you want to come over tonight, we can Netflix and chill. If you don't understand why that's funny, Google Netflix and chill. He asked, is that one of those phrases I'm not supposed to use with you? And there it was. I could practically hear the cortisol coursing through his bloodstream. No matter how well we clicked or what he thought of my company, it was still in his brain that I'm not just a CEO, I'm a female CEO. And working with me might be a minefield of dangers he has to think about. Not because of anything he would ever do or anything I would ever do, but because men neither of us had ever met couldn't control their bro-havior. And women we both respect bravely chose not to remain silent because speaking up is the only way we're going to make progress. So in addition to all the risks,
So let's go back and talk about exactly what she is referring to with respect to the science. And so when you think about it, the brain is capable of processing 11 million bits of information every second. And you have to stop and really think about that. 11 million bits of information per second. So we can't possibly take our time to think about every single decision and everything that we do on a day-to-day basis. So we have two systems that our brain uses, and this is just to kind of summarize things very generally. Of course, you can get more information about the science of this, but basically we have two systems. System one processes information outside of conscious awareness. It's completely involuntary. And the best example that I can give for this is whenever we're driving and we see a red light and a green light. We don't have to stop and think about what do I do next? Okay, it's a red light, so I have to take my foot off the gas and put it on the brake. And we don't have to go through that. Our mind quickly tells us, red light, we just put on the brake. Green light, we can accelerate. That's system one thinking, and it's completely involuntary. System two is conscious processing of information, and it's used when working on tasks requiring concentration. So the best example I can come up with for us as lawyers is when you're working on a brief, when you're working on any type of legal paperwork or a tax return. Those types of things and those types of activities requires us to process information and to really think everything through. That's our system two brain. Now, I'm sure you all can understand and figure out that the system that's used most for decisions is a system 1, because we just don't have time to do everything in detail the way we need to under our system 2 brain. So which system is responsible for responses categorized as implicit bias? I'm sure you've already guessed, it's system 1. So when you keep in mind that we all have to make these split-second decisions in order to save ourselves time every day, you understand that everyone deals with implicit bias. If you leave here with nothing else today, is to understand that every single person, every race, ethnicity, gender, every single person deals with implicit bias. This is not a race issue. And so everyone has to understand that we all have these implicit bias triggers, and we have to figure out how to slow those down so that we don't make offensive decisions and have offensive opinions about people or things. So just to get some definitions out of the way, when we talk about diversity, we're talking about identifying differences with respect to race, ethnicity, gender, age, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, and religion are the big groups. However, really diversity can be anything that makes a person extremely unique. Inclusion is an environment where all persons are valued and respected and supported in order to allow them to reach their full potential and for diverse ideas to be openly received. When you are talking about inclusion, you're incorporating the philosophy of diversity, equity, and inclusion into the DNA of the office. You can hire a number of people from different backgrounds and say, yes, we have a diverse office. But if those individuals do not feel that the environment that they're in is creating a supportive environment, that they're being respected, that their opinions are openly received, then that's really not an inclusive environment. And you can't really have one without the other. You will have diversity, but it will not last for long. You'll see women, you'll see people of color leaving the office, and you'll be wondering, why is it that we cannot maintain these numbers? Why is it that people of diverse backgrounds do not want to work here? So that's why you have to have both D and I. So I'd like to just say that diversity is the mix. Inclusion is getting the mix to work well together. Because when leadership of the office understands that not only do we have to have diversity, but we want everyone to get along and understand each other, that's creating an inclusive environment. Diversity is a fact, it's your numbers, but inclusion is a choice we make as individuals and as leaders, and it's the action behind diversity. And then finally, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And I think this is where many offices may miss the boat a little bit, because you come and you make these great hires, but you don't really interact with people. You still kind of gravitate toward the people that you know, that you grew up with, that you went to school with, or what have you. And you're not really incorporating everyone to the dance or to the office. Just to talk about equity versus equality, because this is another really big issue that comes up. Equity is the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people while identifying and eliminating barriers. And so the goal of equity is to achieve a fair outcome. The flip side of equity is equality, and that's having the same quantity, measure, or value as another. There's no determination of need. And that's where you run into a bit of a problem. I think people say, well, everyone will get, certain types of opportunities, or everyone has the ability to do X, Y, or Z. But if you're not taking into account the determination of need, then it's really not something that's going to be helpful for that individual, and they're not going to feel included. So I think many of you have probably seen this picture. And equality is showing how everyone gets a box to stand on. But the taller young man doesn't even need a box. The young lady needs 2 boxes. And the disabled person needs a ramp. He doesn't need a box at all. And so when you talk about equality, yes, you're giving everyone the same thing, but will they be able to see the game based on what has been given to them? The answer is no. We have to provide people what they need. We have to meet them where they are so that they can get what they need in order to fully participate and to be able to fully see the game. So just some additional definitions. I just wanted you all to know that implicit bias itself has different categories: confirmation bias, attribution bias, availability bias, and affinity bias, but we don't have enough time today to go into all of those definitions. There is a handout that talks about that, so if you're interested in knowing more about the different types of bias, I did include that in your materials. Stereotypes are widely held, fixed, and oversimplified images. But on this slide, I really want you just to kind of become familiar with the terminology of cultural competence. And that's the ability to adapt, work, and manage successfully in new and unfamiliar cultural settings. The ability for organizations and systems to function and perform effectively in cross-cultural situations. And so it's really about putting in the personal work so that you can educate yourself about the differences of people. You can do that individually and you can do that as a group. I worked with a group of public defenders who, they wanted to watch 13th, a movie on Netflix that talks about some of these issues. They wanted to watch it together because they felt as though they all needed to see the same movie at the same time. And then they discussed it on their own, as a group. And I thought that was really great because to me, it seemed like to me that they didn't want to just watch that on their own, but they wanted to share that with colleagues. They wanted to maybe see what another person, what they saw and they didn't necessarily pick up on. Some of the ideas that came out of the movie, they wanted to share with each other since they all work together. So sometimes there's opportunities to do your own independent education to become more culturally competent, but there's lots of opportunities as well to work as a group at your law offices, getting together to maybe watch a movie, to maybe read a book, to maybe share an article and discuss. It can be very simple, but it's better to try to learn to work and do this work individually and think of ideas that you can work together as well. So just wanted to quickly show you how cultural competence is the combination of all of these things: purposeful innovation, managing change, hiring for diversity, and understanding unconscious bias. All of that combined is cultural competency. And there's a couple of handouts that I gave you. Handout 7 is kind of a personal letter that Kyle Korver, a player in the NBA, wrote. And, he talks about how he had to become more culturally competent about the African-American players on his team because he came from what he says was a privileged background. And so he said it was important for him to understand why he would jump to certain assumptions about his teammates, particularly when one of them got into trouble with the police. He immediately assumed, because this African-American player was out late, that he was somehow at fault. And he had to really rethink the way that he was treating this individual and why he came to the conclusions that he did. Unconsciously, he just made certain assumptions. And so that's a really great article to kind of get the perspective of someone who came from what he calls a privileged background to understand why he makes the assumptions that he does. Another handout is handout 8, the Iowa football team article. The coach there knew about some of the implicit bias issues that were going on the team and didn't really do anything about it. But having a conversation with players and those individuals kind of coming out on social media, talking about their struggles, caused for change in that athletic department and with respect to the football team. So I think the same kind of practice has to happen here in our legal offices and in our corporate offices. There has to be discussion. there has to be some type of review for everyone to kind of understand what will make us more culturally competent. So I just wanted to show you this slide so that you kind of understand where your values, your interests, your personality, your skills, that all is developed by all of these different factors. Your family, the media is huge, our gender, our relationships and our spouses, the friends that we're around, the neighborhoods that we grow up in. All of these things factor into what our personality is like, what we value, what our interests are. And all of that will cause us to make different opinions and judgments about things in an unconscious way. So I just want you to think about who is in your network. And normally, if we were in person together, I would have you work on this. But, you know, answering these questions, and at the end, being able to say, okay, I really do have a one-sided way that I interact socially and professionally. I think often what happens is we answer at least maybe 8 of these questions. We're seeing the same types of people. And so what we need to do is strategically and intentionally try to interact with people who don't look like us. I always say that, you know, sometimes it means instead of always going to the local bar association event, that maybe go to one of the affinity groups, going to the minority bar association, going to a women's bar association event, so that you can see people who are different and that you can interact with people and understand maybe why they think the way they do, and understand their backgrounds and their interests. With respect to like the media, it definitely has a huge impact on how we think, because we see these images day in and day out, and we start to form opinions about the people who are in these images. And when you start off very young and see things portrayed in a certain way, when you are older, you start to actually believe, when you see a Black man with dreads, that that person is somehow a bad person. And so this is an example of what the Associated Press used during Hurricane Katrina. And the top picture is a young Black man with dreads. And the caption says, "A young man walks through chest-deep floodwater after looting a grocery store." The photo below that is a white female and a white male. And that caption says, "Two residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store." So my question is, how is it that you know that the Black man looted a grocery store and the white people did not? They found the bread and soda. And so these are the little nuances and the biased treatment that people receive even in the media. And after you keep receiving these messages over and over again, people start to really believe that Black people are always looting and that white people are not. And so what you have to do is you have to slow down your thought process. Before this is even written, the person who wrote this caption didn't even probably think of anything negative or racist at all. It was an unconscious type of reaction because of what that person was probably exposed to with respect to Black people who look a certain way. Our brain, going back to like system 1 and system 2, our brains are really funny. And some of you have maybe seen this on social media, but basically you can read this paragraph without anything being spelled properly. And that's because that's how our mind works. Our minds work because we kind of figure things out quickly. It's our brain processing those 11 million bits of information per second that makes us believe and know that, oh, that word should be according. According to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter be at the right place. And this is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. And so if we were together, I would have everyone read this. And it's so funny because everyone starts laughing because they're like, how were we all able to read all of these misspelled words? Well, it's because that's the way our brain works. And this is exactly how our brain works when we see a Black man walking across the street in a hoodie. There's certain types of assumptions that we quickly make. We also hear about people who don't want to sit next to someone who is perhaps Muslim that walks onto a plane. People get very nervous because of past experiences about what the media has showed with respect to Muslim people. And so this is just an example. If you take it out of context of either race or ethnicity, I just want you to see about how your brain works, how you're able to jump to these conclusions, and how it's not purposeful. It's not someone being bad. It's just the way that our brain works. So as we said, it's human nature. It's automatic responses without any negative intent, and it's departure from neutrality. Our brains create pictures over time and sorts people and things into groups based on our past experiences. And when our brain remembers those experiences and images, then this triggers an unconscious result. So one question that I have, and we don't have time to do very many of them, but if a female attorney returns from maternity leave, is it unconscious bias to spare her the stress of overseas travel due to the pressures of motherhood? What is wrong with this question? And I'm sure you all are thinking in your head, majority of people, of course, this is not good. Yes, it's unconscious bias. Preventing her from traveling to overseas to maybe work with a client, that may harm her career. It also makes assumptions about her ability to maintain a work-life balance. We can make plans and be able to travel even though we have children. It also assumes that men do not take maternity leave and that men are not responsible for childcare when that the two spouses may share that responsibility. It assumes women will be stressed out and unable to handle work and travel. So, when you think about these things and you think that you're trying to maybe help someone, you have to slow down and think about what are the consequences to this person's career, and how is it impacting them with respect to personally and the assumptions that you're making. A second question is, what percentage of hiring managers in the UK admit to negative biases toward individuals with certain regional accents? And you'd be surprised to know it's 80%. And Judge Karen Peters, who was the first woman appointed presiding justice of the Appellate Division 3rd Department, she wrote an article in the State Bar Association edition, the March-April 2017 edition. And it was called Disrupting Implicit Bias is Key to Advancing Diversity and Inclusion. And in that article, she admits that she really didn't realize it until she kind of took a step back and thought about it, that she was discriminating and had a bias against attorneys with a Southern accent. She had handled some cases that there were attorneys that were present with a Southern accent, and she realized that she actually had a bias against them based on their accent. And so it's one thing to have this bias, and it's another to recognize it and try to interrupt it and do something about it. And that's the fabulous thing that she was able to do. The Stroop task is another way to kind of understand how our brain works. And it's fun to do as a group together. But if you try this at home, if you just Google the Stroop task and you have to read the actual word and not the color, that is really difficult sometimes. Or just the opposite, if you try to read the color and not read the word, it really is hard, because our brain wants to just read the word. It doesn't matter that you're supposed to say the color. And so try it at home, and you can see how your brain works and how you can maybe interrupt that bias. The only way to do it is you have to slow down. That is the key to everything. And because we're so busy as lawyers, it's really hard for us to slow down. Our caseloads are high. We have, limited time to do the things that we need to do. But this is really important so that we get the right decisions made. Many of you have probably heard about the confirmation bias, the legal memo test. And this was really an interesting study. It was a memo that was reviewed by 60 partners. They represented 22 different law firms. On this review panel, there were 23 women and 37 men. 21 racial or ethnic minorities were represented. 39 people were Caucasian. And half of them received information that the particular legal memo was written by an African-American NYU law school student. The other half received information that the memo was written by a Caucasian NYU law school student. Obviously, it was exactly the same memo, but with that information, it was amazing how the difference was with respect to the corrections. And so the African-American law student, the average grade was 3.2 out of 5. For spelling grammar errors, 5.8 out of 7 were found, which I think is, out of all of these statistics, that's the most glaring one. And technical writing errors, 4.9 out of 6 were found. And errors in fact, 3.9 out of 5 were found. I think the other piece that's really interesting is the actual comments that were made by the partners who reviewed the memo. And for the African-American student, they said, this person needs a lot of work. Can't believe he went to NYU, average at best. But when you look at the Caucasian law student, the comments were generally good writer, but needs to work on X, Y, and Z. So what does that give you a hint to? They're willing to mentor. They're willing to help this person become better. This person has potential, good analytical skills. So what does that say? Finding the positives to give that person the comfort and support and motivation to kind of keep doing better. And so it's really an interesting result, because what they found was no significant correlations between race, ethnicity, or gender of the evaluators made this more of a harsh evaluation. So what they're saying is that the people from diverse backgrounds and women were just as hard on the African-American law student as the Caucasian partners were. But I think the key is when we expect to find fewer errors, we find fewer errors. And what exactly does that mean in the context of this legal memo? Well, I think that people believe that Black people and Black law students are not as good writers as white students. And so when they were told that they were reviewing a memo of an African-American student, they expected to find errors. So they found more errors. When you believe that the work is being done by someone who has really great writing skills, your brain does not process finding the errors as much. And so the confirmation bias is that supervising lawyers perceived African-American lawyers and law students to be subpar in their writing skills in comparison to Caucasian lawyers and law students. And this experiment is online. You can, read more in depth about it, but it's a really interesting research. So how to test your belief system. What do I believe about a person, type of person, or group of people? Why do I believe it? Why do I need to believe it? What other practices or beliefs that I hold will be impacted if I find this belief to be inaccurate? And so one of the best examples I can give is, why do you believe a certain thing about an African-American male wearing a hoodie? And if you think about the Trayvon Martin situation, they talk about him, all he was doing was wearing a hoodie and had a bag of Skittles. And so, you know, what was going on in the mind of the person who shot him? Was it that he felt as though he was a threat because of this hoodie and this whole kind of belief in our country about Black men wearing a hoodie? Or was it something else? And so you have to start to question yourself about why you believe certain things about certain people, and then adjust why you believe it. If you cannot come up with a reason that's reasonable, then you have to adjust your thinking. So here are some of the steps that you can follow. Step one is recognize the bias and interrupt the unconscious thought or action. And that's counter stereotypes. You want to be able to just slow down. And when you do slow down, you're going to recognize the biases. With respect to step one, think about, you know, not letting your colleagues, family members, or friends make offensive comments or jokes without bringing to their attention the need for corrective behavior. I think that's one of the hardest things that we have to do, because when we recognize that there's a problem, we have to kind of call that person out a little bit. You don't have to do it in front of people, but I think it's really important to interrupt the bias, because sometimes people don't recognize they're doing it, but I think it's important that they understand that you will not tolerate it, that you want people to do better, particularly when you're a leader in an office, because those individuals who might be offended are looking to you in order to make things better within the office. Change unsupported beliefs and think individually. You know, this is really hard because our society kind of says X, Y, and Z about certain types of people. But I think you have to say, why do I believe this? And is it properly supported? And if you can't find proper support for it, then really you shouldn't be thinking it about a particular group of people. And then challenge yourself to acknowledge your own biases. It's really difficult, and we've all had to do it. But I believe every household that anyone has ever grew up in has had to deal with, you know, certain types of stereotypes and things that are said that are probably offensive. But as a child, you may not know that. But growing up and getting older, you start to believe and understand that this might not be the best way to approach a situation. One of the best ways that you can figure out exactly where you are with respect to believing certain things about certain groups of people is completing an implicit association test. And I'll include that at the end of this presentation, but you know, the Harvard Implicit Association Test is one of the most popular ones. And, you know, there's plenty of them out there. There's some that, you know, you can get to every category: race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, just various categories. And depending on how you score, you can kind of determine whether or not you kind of have an issue in that area. And it really is a good way for you to just start at step one, to at least acknowledge and understand where you might have a bias. And then you start educating yourself. And I really feel that the first thing that you do is recognizing the problem is really the hardest part. The education part is not as difficult. It's acknowledging that all of us, we all have something that we have to work on. So this is another slide I borrowed from the American Bar Association, but you know, how is implicit bias operating in you and in others? And I think it's important to start considering every person of relevance to a particular case that you're working on, that whether you're in the courtroom or if you're just kind of, you know, working with opposing counsel to maybe get a settlement or something, but just thinking about all the different parties that you have to associate with, you know, the judge, the prosecutor, the defendant, jurors, court personnel. When I think about all of the different people in the courtroom that have to interact with each other, how is it that I'm able to stay neutral and not make assumptions about people and still get the job done. What I have to do as the judge is make sure that everyone is feeling that they are being treated appropriately and fairly. And that includes everyone. Of course, I'm speaking from a criminal perspective, and defendants really have to, they have to feel that they are not being treated in an unfair way. Or particularly for my court, I'm in the domestic violence court, people always, say that we are leaning and helping more for our survivors. But that's not necessarily the case. It's my job to stay neutral for everyone. And so think about on all of your cases, all of the different players that you have to interact with, and how can you be the most neutral, and that you can be the very best that you can be in trying to work through a case and hopefully come to a resolution. I'll just give for an example, criminal defense attorneys. There's lots of discretionary decisions that you can make. Time spent evaluating evidence, whether to conduct a factual investigation, making motions to suppress, recommending a plea deal, engaging in work to address sentencing. All of these different discretionary decisions you can think about with respect to your case. Do you do that when you are dealing with a criminal or defendant that has a history, a criminal history, as opposed to, and I kind of watched this when I first started, when I was training, I kind of watched a criminal defense attorney who consistently was like, well, I know this person didn't do something because they were female. And it was an automatic assumption that, these women couldn't possibly have been engaging in what, was domestic violence charges. So, is that fair? Is that really, approaching your criminal defense position in the right way, believing that all of the men are always pretty much guilty and not really taking much time to figure out if the particular case has all of the proper evidence, or, all the women were not guilty. Interaction moments are really important, introductions. How do you treat your client when you first meet that person? Oftentimes they may have been sitting in the holding center for a little while. They may not look their best, but trying to listen to their story and their experience, getting the proper information and interviewing witnesses and family members. How do you treat those witnesses? How do you treat those family members? It's really important to slow down and think about, how do you treat cases? How do you handle cases when you kind of already made a little bit of an assumption about if the person is guilty or not? And the same holds true for prosecutors. Plea bargaining and jury selection and charging decisions, all of these things are impacted if you already believe someone is guilty based on the way that they look. And there were a couple of studies that were done regarding Blacks and sentencing outcomes. And what's really interesting is that men that were dark-skinned, broad-nosed, big lips, and wearing an afro or dreadlocks, the research showed that they received harsher sentences, even though there might have been identical charges and the same type of criminal history or no criminal history. So that was one of the big studies that came out that showed that there was definitely a bias against Black men who had a certain look. And then another study out of Georgia concluding that Blacks received sentences that are 4.25% harsher than whites after controlling for types of crime. And dark-skinned Black men receive sentences 4.8% harsher than whites. Light-skinned Blacks receive sentences that were not statistically significant. So it's really interesting as well to see how even when they're after controlling for the type of crime, the Blacks received sentences that were much harsher. So how can we change the way that we think, We have to start making some decisions about, how we think, how we're going to change the way we think, and how are we going to change the atmosphere and the environment at our offices. And so we have to commit to being fair and learning how to be fair in everything that we think and do. Admitting the obvious, the first bias we have is to believe ourselves to be bias-free. If you hear someone say, I don't have any biases, this and that and the other thing, that's the first clue that they do, because everyone has them. And so examine your circle of influencers. I try to interact and, have lots of friends that come from lots of different backgrounds, because I learned so much, and I hope that they learn something from me as well. I think it's important to get uncomfortable. People of color are usually in majority spaces. So majority of people should get comfortable with visiting minority spaces. And so that's why I suggest, once we're over COVID, attending a minority bar association event, reading a book by a diverse author, participate in diverse events. I even watch all of the 3 networks for news, because I think it's important to hear all different perspectives. I don't want to kind of get caught up in one network that you hear the same thing. I like to hear a broad range of what's going on, and then do my own research to find out what's really true and what's kind of fabricated or exaggerated. And I think the only way you can do that is exposing yourself to all of the different views and all of the different opinions. I have there the nanny example, because there was a story that I read online about a Black woman who went to the park with her baby, and she had the baby in the stroller, and she sat down on a bench, and she was a darker complected Black woman, and the baby was very fair skinned. And so a white woman sat down next to her and says, "Oh, what a beautiful baby. You're such a great nanny. I see that you're taking great care of her." And of course, the woman was so offended. This was her baby. She's married to a white man, so the baby was fair skinned. And so you have to just, I don't believe that the woman meant any harm, intentional harm, but it's an unconscious kind of bias to think that this woman must be a nanny in order to have, this child with her that's of fair skin. So get to know someone before making an assumption about them based on what you see. So how do you overcome discrepancies identified, unconscious biases, and your conscious ideas? Interact with individuals. We talked about collect data, think about posting procedures, interviewing and hiring practices, community service, employee evaluations, promotions of professional and support staff. Collect all of that data, because what you will see if you collect the data over time is that many times there's not much diversity going on. Many of the people who are being hired might all look the same. Many of the people who are being promoted may all look the same. Any community service that's being done by the office might serve a certain community, but not all communities or diverse communities. And so those are interrupters, because the data doesn't lie. And it makes you kind of face the facts about exactly what's going on. And then finally, when you're in the office, in the courtroom, at board meetings, look around the room and see who is missing. Because many times you will see that, wow, everyone here is female. Everyone here is white except me. Everyone here is male except a few women. So you want to be able to look around so that you can see what the needs of that particular organization might be. Just some quick statistics here with respect to just move this. With respect to gender and our legal profession, it really has not changed much from 2009 to 2019. You see that we've gone up just, a little bit, but generally speaking, we are, still not where we need to be with respect to even women in the profession. And then if you look at race and ethnicity, African Americans in 2009 is 5%, and 10 years later, it's still 5%. And so that's one of the things that kind of lets us know that we still have a lot of work to do. A lot of people say that implicit bias is one of the big issues that causes for these numbers to not really change. And that if we deal with diversity and inclusion and implicit bias, that hopefully these numbers will change. And with respect to lawyers and other professions, we are, other than the natural sciences and dentistry, lawyers in the legal profession is the least diverse. And so it really is something that, the numbers don't lie. And handout 4 is a Fordham Law Review article that the general counsels were a part of. And it's really interesting to read how they even admit that, we're really the least diverse. Physicians and surgeons and accountants, all of these other professions are doing better than lawyers. And then some statistics regarding the LGBTQ community and our lawyers. Again, we're not seeing the numbers that we need to see. We are still here with the exception of firms of 100 or fewer. They're not hitting even 2% barely for partners, and less than 4% for associates. And so you have to ask yourself again, the question is, why are these numbers the way that they are? And for your reference, handout 16 deals with proper terminology for the LGBTQ community. This really is impactful for those of you who work in the court system or in legal service agencies. You really need to make sure you understand the proper terms and terminology that's used with respect to people in the LGBTQ communities. I also included a handout about words that are considered transphobic and why. We all must be patient during the process of educating. So you have to make sure that if you come in contact with someone and you make you make a mistake and you say something that is offensive, that you just simply apologize and just ask for people to be patient. And also, don't be afraid to call lawyers and other professionals who are experts in this area. I know in Erie County, we have a number of lawyers who are experts in this area. Don't be afraid to do that, because we're all learning, and it's all an educational experience. And then employer considerations. It's really important. We talked about the top-down approach, which is led by key decision makers. Commitments to equal opportunities need to be reflected in policies, priorities, and compensation structures. So, we have to kind of get out of this whole, the men are being paid more than women, that the people of color are making less than those who are white. The top-down approach ensures that. And then tracking assignments and performance is also really important. We have seen that women and attorneys of color say that they don't get the assignments that are really going to give them the skills that they need, or to build the skills that they need in order to improve their practice and to meet the people that they want to meet in order to make the rain. and then that they don't receive the mentoring that they need in order to do better. And, oftentimes someone's assigned as a mentor, but really, is that the right person is the question. Who should really be mentoring? I had someone come to me confidentially to talk about the fact that they were assigned a mentor, and this person does not even really talk to them, doesn't really give them good advice, didn't really want to be a mentor. And so leadership has to address those issues because, a mentoring program is only as good as the mentors who want to be there. And it needs to be those who are influential partners, quite frankly. They need to be the people who have the relationships and who have the background to help those younger attorneys or newer attorneys improve their practice. Also, don't keep repeating the same education programs. Sometimes we run into the problem where, a particular office might think that they're doing just fine because they once a year have a diversity program. That really isn't going to work. You really have to kind of continue to offer educational programs, and diversity, inclusion, and equity is an evolving topic. So, at a minimum, I would say 4 to 5 times a year, there needs to be some type of education for the office. And then supervisors need to be educated as well, because it's very difficult to kind of to correct the behavior of employees. It's a sensitive topic, but when people make offensive comments or do things that are, what they think might be funny, it's difficult for some people to correct that behavior. And all I can say is that if you don't feel that you're able to do that, then you probably should not be in supervision. And you have to make sure, the leaders of the office have to make sure that they have the right people in middle management, because they have a tough job to do, to monitor all of this and to make sure that, that everyone is kind of on board and doing what needs to be done. So I think it's important for employers to appoint, train, and empower bias interrupters, and these are experienced leaders in the office. And they are the ones that are going to implement the policies and execute the policies that the leaders believe is necessary. Emphasize the importance of self-evaluations, and certainly evaluate the evaluators. It's really important that you monitor the people who are evaluating the other employees. And you also need to evaluate the people who are executing the diversity plan and initiatives for the office. It's really important to publish your information relating to diversity initiatives. It's important for clients, it's important for the employees, because everyone then is on notice that diversity is important. And part of that diversity is going to be dealing with implicit bias. And how is the office going to deal with that? And so it's important to put it on the website, put your plan on the website, put your commitment to diversity on the website, make sure that the employees know that this is something that's important to the office. Millennials, this is one of the big issues we talked about at the beginning, but, there's, with respect to law firms in particular, and the legal profession in general, we kind of still want to do things the old-fashioned way. I think COVID kind of pushed the legal profession into a new kind of realm, but we have to kind of make an effort to better understand a newer generation of lawyers. We have to be able to understand that everything that was done 25, 30, 40, 50 years ago is not necessarily going to work for everyone today. Exit interviews are really important for employers, because if you are seeing women and attorneys of color consistently leaving the office, you need to understand why. And having those exit interviews are invaluable. I did a lot of exit interviews when I worked for the appellate division, and some of them were official and some were unofficial. And the ones that were unofficial actually gave me more information about what was going on, why a person wanted to leave, particularly when you start to see people leaving from a particular department. And you start to kind of get concerned about, well, what's going on there? Why is everyone leaving? People not feeling comfortable for some reason. So it's really important to conduct those exit interviews. And then diversity budgets are really important because, where a corporate or legal office puts their money is where they're saying things are important. And so you don't have to spend a ton of money, but you do need to be able to say there is a budget so that the educational programs and the various other services that the office wants to offer will be available. I always like to, advise employers to think about the Rooney Rule or the Mansfield Rule. The Rooney rules with the NFL, Mansfield rules with the legal profession, but, at least making sure that when you are getting ready to hire for a position, that you have a diverse group of candidates to interview. And that if you don't, that you don't just go forward, but that you kind of figure out what's going on. Why don't we have more women who are applying? Why don't we have more attorneys of color applying for a particular position? And making an effort to, make sure that there is some diversity to the panel itself, the interview panel itself, because sometimes what one person might see in a candidate, another person will not. And sometimes it really helps to have people from different backgrounds to kind of highlight some of the good things and or bad things about a particular candidate and what certain things need to be kind of brought to light with respect to hiring. With respect to even the court system, it's mandatory to have a diverse person on each panel. And to make sure that diverse views are represented. So I just want to make sure we're almost out of time. I think we are about out of time. I just want to get into the ethics portion. And, I'll just kind of focus on Rule 1.1, competence. But really 1.1 through 1.4 of the Rules of Professional Conduct, Part 1200, is understanding that you have to understand your client in a culturally competent way in order to provide the very best representation that you can. And so when you read 1.1, you have to think about how are you able to provide this service. You almost can't do it unless you understand a person's background. 1.1, Rule 1.1a says a lawyer should provide competent representation to a client. Competent representation requires the legal knowledge, skill, thoroughness, and preparation reasonably necessary for the representation. And so it's really difficult. Let's say you're representing someone who does not speak English as their primary language. There's no way that you'll be able to represent that client in a culturally competent manner if you don't have consistent meetings that engage an interpreter and understand exactly what that client is looking to do, how to resolve the case, and how that person might feel about a particular issue. I think what often happens, and I've heard some of the complaints about attorneys who don't act in a culturally competent manner, is that there are assumptions that someone will want to handle a case just because that's the way we normally handle a case. And so you can't make certain assumptions about people and how they're going to want to resolve a particular case, because from their perspective and from their diverse opinion and from their diverse experiences, that might not be the way they want to go. And if you kind of insert yourself and to try to kind of lead that client into a particular area because, you know, that's what the norm is, that's not representing someone in a culturally competent way. And so I think it's really important that you remember, particularly for clients who have certain disabilities, you know, or have different socioeconomic issues, you know, be flexible with the way that you can meet people, you know, locations, and, you know, be understanding about childcare and transportation issues. You know, you have to understand what might be taboo for a particular culture, because it can really impact your representation of that client. Studies show that attorneys unconsciously negotiate more lenient settlement offers for Caucasians versus people of color. And that, you know, from a criminal perspective, that really is majorly impactful. Being sure that you're properly selecting interpreters is huge. I've had to adjourn cases because, you know, there wasn't enough information from the attorney to tell us that, you know, a person maybe speaks a certain dialect. And so if you don't have that information, you can't properly even communicate with your client, because some of these languages, the same word has very, very different meanings. So you have to really make sure you understand, you know, your client and what exactly they need. Representing clients, you also have to understand any trauma that the client may have suffered related to or unrelated to the pending case. And, you know, I think about a lot of this with respect to domestic violence cases, but it really pertains to many other areas of law. And for every case, you know, I recommend, in order to be consistent with the professional rules of conduct, you know, you've got to challenge, what challenges do you foresee for yourself in representing the client? Be honest about that so that you can put that on the table and start addressing it and dealing with it. What challenges do you anticipate in court? What can you do to mitigate these challenges and empower your client? Because the one thing you want to do is be able to at least make your client feel that they are heard and that they are able to participate on some level. And these are the implicit association tests that are really, they're all great. The tolerance.org ones and the lookdifferent.org ones have lots of different categories. And so you know, definitely try to take one of these tests. If you just Google implicit association tests, there will be so many that come up, and, you know, you can, the Harvard one, of course, is the most popular, but, you know, try different ones and get your starting ground as to where you are with this issue, so that you can start educating yourself. I kind of like to use this slide to kind of start, particularly those who are leaders in their offices, to start thinking about, you know, where you are with respect to your diversity and inclusion plan for your office, and for, you know, these types of trainings, bias training, anti-racism training, all of these different things that kind of need to be addressed with employees, but also teaching your employees that this is the DNA, this is the culture of the office, and that you are, you know, insisting that clients are dealt with in the same way. And so, you know, where do you find yourself on this spectrum, you know, 1 to 5? The company has needs that have not been addressed, you know, that's fine, you're at step 1. That there's been some initiated kind of ideas about diversity and inclusion plan, you know, that's okay too. addressing a need via an undocumented program, that's fine, but you want to make sure that you're working toward getting your plan documented. Step 3, you're, managed, you're still a program, but now you're better defined and documented. And the cost is borne by the Diversity and Inclusion Office. Results and organizational capabilities are increased. And so that's, you're kind of on the right road, but, you really want to be at level 5. The practice is recognized internally and externally. You're collecting the data, and the corporate structure, the budget is covered, that there's no questions about where money is coming from. Handout 17 is a sample employee survey. And in that survey, it kind of asks questions about what the employees think, how diversity and how different issues about people, how they're treated in the office, what do they think? And it's a really great way to kind of get an idea of where everyone is with this topic, but also how they feel about working in your particular office. And it's really important to kind of gauge that, because, let's face it, we want people to stay in their offices. We want the least amount of turnover as possible. So I think it's really important to try to gauge where employees are. And there's tons of sample diversity plans that are out there. The NFTA, if you go to their website, they have a fantastic diversity plan that my friend, Dr. Christine Farrow, created and designed. And, it's wonderful because it's really detailed. And it really kind of outlines and it kind of sets the tone for everyone. It's on the website, so the employees and all of the customers and everybody out there can see it. But it kind of holds everyone's feet to the fire because it's in writing, and the NFTA has to kind of keep coming back to it to say, how are we doing? There's other websites that are great. For law firms, I just happen to have seen the Harder, Seacrest, and Emory website. They have diversity webpage up there, and they talk about all of their different programs. I think it's just important to have something in writing that you're showing to the public and to clients that this is an important issue for you. I know one of my family members was a high-ranking bank officer, and she was telling me that, if they are looking for legal services, they go to the websites first before they even contact lawyers, because they want to see, is this diversity issue something that's important to the firm? And one of the things that she said is, if they don't even have anything on their website about diversity, we usually kind of just keep moving on to someone else, because that tells us that they're kind of out of touch and not really understanding what's going on in our society today. So, it's really important. If you don't have one up there, it really does, impact your bottom line. This is what clients want, and it's important in order to provide the best services to clients. So I'm going to play one last video.
Judge, really quick before you do that, I want to make sure everybody has the code for today's webinar. It is 1020 BIAS. That's 1020 BIAS. It's in the chat, but I also just wanted to announce it so everybody has it. The link for the verification and evaluation forms are also in the chat box.
All right, and so I want to play one more video. This video kind of just drives home the point about how we all really need to just understand that we're all diverse. We all come from different backgrounds, and because of that, we all might get to a certain point in our lives at different in different ways, and that we need to respect each other and respect our differences, and that, you know, we sometimes kind of feel that one person might be better than another just based on their whole social class and ethnicity. So I'll play this.
Line up, everybody line up. We're about to race. Everybody line up. Shoulder to shoulder, take off your backpacks. Basketball, line up, we're about to race. Hey, we are racing for a $100 bill. The winner of this race will take this. It's a $100 bill. Before I say go, I'm going to make a couple statements. If those statements apply to you, I want you to take 2 steps forward. If those statements don't apply to you, I want you to stay right where you're at. Take 2 steps forward if both of your parents are still married. Take 2 steps forward if you grew up with a father figure in the home. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a private education. Take 2 steps forward if you had access to a free tutor growing up. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to worry about your cell phone being shut off. Take 2 steps forward if you've never had to help mom or dad with the bills. Take 2 steps forward if it wasn't because of your athletic ability, you don't have to pay for college. Take 2 steps forward if you never wondered where your next meal was going to come from. I want you guys up here in the front just to turn around and look. Every statement I've made has nothing to do with anything any of you have done. Has nothing to do with decisions you've made. Everything I have said has nothing to do with what you've done. We all know these people up here have a better opportunity to win this $100. Does that mean these people back here can't race? No. We would be foolish to not realize we've been given more opportunity. We don't want to recognize that we've been given a head start. But the reality is we have. Now, there's no excuse. They still got to run their race. You still got to run your race. But whoever wins this $100, I think it'd be extremely foolish of you not to utilize that and learn more about somebody else's story. Because the reality is, if this was a fair race and everybody was back on that line, I guarantee you some of these black dudes would smoke all of you. And it's only because you have this big of a head start that you're possibly going to win this race called life. That is a picture of life, ladies and gentlemen. Nothing you've done has put you in the lead that you're in right now. When I say go, on your mark, get set, go. If you didn't learn anything from this activity, you're a fool.
So I want to end with that video and just the message that if we ever get together again in the future, we'll start with the race and why some people have a head start. Diversity and inclusion are about giving value to every human being, no matter our differences. And I hope that this presentation was able to give you guys something to help you go forward, to make your offices better, make yourselves better. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Judge Foot-Beavers. Before we get to any questions, I just want to reiterate where the evaluation and verification forms can be found. One place you can find them is at the UB Law website, which is law.buffalo.edu/201028.html. That information is in the chat if you can see it. You can also go to the page that you registered at the Jackson Center on the Jackson Center's website, and there is a link to that to the UB website as well there. And again, for clarity, the code for today is 1020 bias, 1020 BIAS. All right, and let's see if we have any questions. I was answering some as we were going along, but
Okay, good. I know we're a little over time, so.
Yes, and certainly I know we had some technical difficulties at the beginning, so I appreciate everybody hanging in. Please, when you complete the evaluation and verification forms, email them to Lisa Mueller. Her information is at the bottom of the verification form, so it's right there all in one capsule. So Judge, we're actually not getting any questions right now. Right. Lots of compliments though. So.
All right, good. Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation, and everyone take care.
Yeah, well, and like I said, I know we had some technical issues at the beginning, so thank you so much for sticking with us and letting us know that we had those issues. Thank you also to Judge Foot-Beavers for this wonderful presentation and discussion on implicit bias. A reminder, obviously, to complete your verification and evaluation forms. And also one final reminder for the UB Mass Incarceration Program that will be held on November 5th. That information for that program is also in the chat. It's the very first thing that we posted. You can register for that event at the UB Law website /alumni event. And then obviously, if you are free at 2 o'clock tomorrow, please, or 3 p.m. tomorrow, sorry, please tune in to Tea Time with the Jackson Center, where we will be talking with Ruth Marcus, the deputy editor for the Washington Post, about the recent Supreme Court confirmation process and what that might mean for the court going forward. Thank you to all of us for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. You too.